It is really great to be back here in Boston and cradle of liberty and a crowd of people who are determined to try to recapture, preserve that heritage and restore that liberty. You know, when the colonists were dumping that tea into the harbor, they were protesting taxation without representation, which they considered to be tyranny. Well, I can tell you one thing, excess taxation, even with representation, is just as tyrannical. How good they had them in King George. Because I would take the tyranny of King George over the income tax, over the Social Security tax, over the estate tax, over the gift tax, over the property tax. But you know, and it's not even taxes. Taxes aren't really a true measure of tyranny or oppression. It's actually government spending that's a better measure. That's regulation. And you know, we just have this new big compromise between President Obama and the Republicans in Congress. And they're all claiming it's a victory for us because our taxes are being cut.
Stay in the same.
Well, the government is getting more expensive. The government is going to spend more under this compromise, not less. So how are they doing us a favor? If government is getting more expensive, who's going to pay for it? We're going to pay for it.
That's right.
And first of all, it shows you they're claiming, right? They're claiming too that these tax cuts are going to be an economic stimulus. Right? These are the same people who created the economic crisis, who didn't see it coming, who assured us that everything was great, and now just another one of their stimulus is this is going to do the trick. Well, first of all, the income tax rates under the new plan are exactly the tax rates of the old plan. They're the same tax rates we've had for the last 8 years. So number one, how is that a cut? They're trying to say, well, we didn't get a tax hike, therefore we should consider that a tax cut. It shows how much we've lost here as far as we've lowered the bar on a tax cut. But how is the same tax rates going to be stimulative? Also, there's some tax credits that they preserve, some temporary tax credits, but of course, that's all a bunch of political gimmicks, because all that does is it causes resources to be allocated in an inefficient manner, because it goes to where the politicians want it, not where the market wants it. But they did cut payroll taxes. I think there's a 2% cut in the payroll tax. But where's that money coming from? I mean, if the government's still spending, where are they going to get the money to put in our bodies? Well, they got to take it out of a different pocket. See, when the government decides not to finance its spending through taxes, it's only got really one other choice, or two other choices. It can borrow the money. But if it borrows the money, it's got to pay it back. And it's got to pay it back with interest, which means it costs us money when they cut our taxes and keep spending. In fact, of all the ways to finance government spending, the least expensive is taxation. Debt is by far more expensive, and that's what they've given us. But the real problem is we're running out of people to borrow from. So are we really going to be able to borrow this extra money from the Chinese? There was a news story that came out, I don't know if anybody saw it, on Saturday night. It's probably going to have some bearing on the way the markets trade on Monday. But Chinese inflation now, year over year, is about 5.1% over the last year. And interest rates in China, short-term rates, are still about 2.5%. So the official inflation rate is twice the deposit rate. And the cost of food in China is up 12% in the last year. And, the Chinese government said, oh my God, we are going to get tough on inflation. Meanwhile, Chinese money supply is growing like crazy because they won't let their currency rise. And because they're printing all this money to buy up our dollars that we send over there to buy their products. The reason there's inflation in China is because we export it to them. They give us products and we give them paper. So products leave China and paper comes in. That's why there's inflation. And if the Chinese start to wake up, they realize that the only way that they can solve their problems is to stop subsidizing us, and so they're probably not going to want to buy all this new debt. In fact, the most likely buyer of all the new deficits that are going to be generated in the name of preserving these tax cuts is going to be the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is going to get all that money. And where's the Federal Reserve getting the money? You know, how many saw Ben Bernanke on 60 Minutes? Ben Bernanke said, you know, there's a rumor out there that we're printing money. So we're not printing any money. We're just buying treasuries. With what money? Where are they getting that money? Right, they're printing that money. And what happens to the money in your pocket when the government prints more of it? Well, it doesn't buy as much. It's inflation. It's the inflation tax. And that's what the government is doing. They're substituting the income tax for an inflation tax. And so maybe the average American is going to have a few extra $100 in his pocket because of the tax cuts. Well, he's going to need all that money because it's going to be more expensive to buy food. It's going to be more expensive to buy energy. It's going to be more expensive to buy a lot of things. And that added expense is a tax. And also part of this new compromise bill is that we're going to pay people not to work in the name of creating jobs. You know, they're extending the unemployment benefits. And rather than having a discussion about the merits of it, all they want to talk about is can we afford it? Well, we can never afford it, no matter how much money we have. We can't afford to pay people not to work. Because if you pay people not to work, they won't. And you know, the government is saying, oh, no, but it's an economic stimulus. Because when you give money to people who are unemployed, they spend it. As if they saved the money, that would be terrible. And so it's a great thing that they'll spend it. So somehow, printing money and giving it to unemployed people to spend, that's going to grow the economy. Well, if that worked, you know, there'd be an economic boom right now in Zimbabwe. Somebody showed me his $100 trillion Zimbabwe bill that he has in his wallet. That's the monetary policy that we have. Now, where are we headed? Now, as I said, the same people who helped create this crisis and couldn't see it coming, they're the ones that are saying this stimulus is going to work. Well, if paying the unemployed not to work, creating jobs, we've been doing that for a couple of years. Right? We've been applying the stimulus since the very first. Remember George Bush's stimulus checks, the ones that he sent out? That's when it all started. Although the real stimulus, started earlier in the first Bush administration, when we stimulated ourselves out of the housing bubble, out of the stock market bubble, into a housing bubble. But where are we now? Are we actually going to get out of this recession? No. There is no way out of this recession. It's impossible. Because what are our leaders telling us is the cure? The cure is that we spend more money. But how can that possibly be the cure? How can anybody look around at the U.S. economy and say, I figured it out. We're not spending enough. We need to spend more. I mean, we spend better than anybody. I mean, the American consumer is known throughout the world for his profit. How can we have to spend more? I mean, you remember this, the old saying, shop until you drop? Yeah. We did it. How can we have to spend more? The reality is that what we need is the exact opposite of spending. We need savings. We need underconsumption. That's what we need. Production. We need capital investment. We need productive employment. But none of that will happen if we keep spending money, especially if we're borrowing it and printing it. And it's not just individuals, the government that's spending all this money. So what's going to happen? Where are we? Everybody likes to credit the Federal Reserve for saving the economy from the brink. Right? We were told that if the government did not intervene in 2000, if we didn't have the TARP, if we didn't bail out the banks, we were going to have a worse crisis than the Great Depression. Right? A worse crisis if we didn't do that. Now think about it. Let's assume that that's true.